In a small town nestled in the hills of Cebu, a father and son shared a dream that seemed too big for their humble life. Every morning before sunrise, the father would leave home to work long hours repairing fishing boats by the shore, while his son stayed behind to attend school. But when the evening came, their small home filled with music. The father strummed his old guitar, its body scratched and faded, and the boy sang along with a clear, angelic voice that could soften even the hardest hearts. It wasn't just a pastime, it was their bond, their escape, and their hope. The father had once dreamed of being a singer himself, but life had different plans. Now, seeing his son's gift, he believed their shared dream could still come true through him. They would sing together at local fiestas, birthdays, and church gatherings, often performing for free just to bring smiles to people's faces. The applause and laughter were their only reward, but to them, it was everything. One rainy night, after a small performance, a tourist from Manila recorded their song and posted it online. A few weeks later, the video went viral, reaching thousands of people across the Philippines and even abroad. Strangers commented about how their voices blended with such purity and emotion. Some said it made them cry, others said it reminded them of home. Then, one day, they received an email that changed everything. It was an invitation to audition for America's Got Talent. At first, they thought it was a scam, but after checking and confirming, reality hit. They had been discovered. The father couldn't believe it. His hands trembled as he read the message over and over. The son's eyes widened with excitement, and they both hugged tightly, tears streaming down their faces. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation and hope. The town came together to support them. Neighbors helped raise money for their flight, while friends and relatives offered prayers and blessings. The boy packed his tiny backpack with his favorite toy and a small wooden cross his mother had given him for luck. As they boarded the plane to America, it was their first time leaving the country. They looked out the window, holding hands, realizing this was more than a trip, it was the beginning of a new chapter. The father whispered to his son, "Whatever happens, just sing from your heart." When they finally stood on the stage of America's Got Talent, the bright lights almost blinded them. The boy squeezed his father's hand tightly as they faced the massive crowd and the intimidating panel of judges. Simon Cowell looked at them curiously, leaning forward with his usual skeptical expression. The father introduced them softly, his accent thick with warmth. "We are from Cebu, Philippines. We sing together because it makes us happy." The crowd responded with cheers, sensing their sincerity. When the music began, the boy took the first note, his voice pure and strong, carrying through the theater like a prayer. The father joined in harmony, his deeper tone wrapping around his son's higher voice like a protective embrace. They sang, "You Raise Me Up," a song that perfectly reflected their journey, about love, faith, and resilience. As they reached the chorus, the boy's voice soared with emotion, and the father's eyes glistened. You could feel years of sacrifice, love, and hope flowing through every note. The audience began to rise to their feet even before the song ended. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Sofia Vergara whispered, "That's beautiful," while Heidi Klum placed her hand over her heart. When the last note faded, there was silence for a split second before thunderous applause filled the theater. The father looked overwhelmed, while the boy smiled shyly at the crowd. Simon Cowell, usually reserved, stood up. His eyes were glassy, and he simply said, "That was magic." Then, without another word, he pressed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from above, raining down on them like a dream. The father knelt down and hugged his son tightly as they both cried under the shower of gold. It wasn't just a buzzer, it was a moment that would forever define their lives. For the first time, the world had seen their love through song, and even Simon Cowell had been moved to tears. After that unforgettable golden buzzer moment, the father and son from Cebu became overnight sensations. Their audition video spread like wildfire across social media, gathering millions of views within days. People around the world were captivated not only by their incredible talent but by the love and humility that radiated through their performance. News outlets picked up their story, calling them the duo that made Simon Cowell cry. The boy couldn't stop smiling whenever he saw their video being replayed on television, while the father watched in disbelief, still processing that their voices had reached so many hearts. Despite all the attention, they stayed grounded. Every morning, they would call home to Cebu, video chatting with their family and neighbors. Their mother would remind them to pray, and their community would sing songs of support. The father constantly told his son that fame should never change who they are. "We sing to inspire," he would say, "not to impress." The duo began getting invites to small events and charity concerts around Los Angeles while waiting for the next AGT round. Instead of taking expensive gigs, they chose to visit a children's hospital, singing for patients who were battling illnesses. Their rendition of "Heal the World" made nurses and children cry. One little girl, after hearing them sing, whispered, "You made me feel strong." That moment reminded the father why they started singing in the first place. As the semifinal round approached, they decided to write their own song instead of covering a famous one. The father wrote the lyrics at night while his son slept, crafting a piece that told their story, a promise between a parent and a child to stay together no matter what. They titled it, "Hand in Hand." The boy loved the song immediately and suggested adding a few Cebuano lines to make it truly their own. They rehearsed for hours, polishing every note and emotion. The father sometimes got emotional during practice, his voice breaking when he sang the line, "When the road gets hard, I'll carry you." The boy would smile and squeeze his hand, saying, "We can do this, Papa." When the night of the semifinals came, the theater was filled with anticipation. The crowd already knew the father-son duo, and fans held banners that said, "Cebu Pride," and "Hand in Hand Forever." When they walked onto the stage, Simon Cowell smiled warmly at them, clearly rooting for their success. As the soft piano music began, the boy started singing in a trembling yet heartfelt tone, his innocence filling the hall. The father joined in, his voice deep and tender, harmonizing perfectly. The song's lyrics painted a picture of love, faith, and unity. Every verse told a piece of their life, the struggles in Cebu, the sacrifices, and the unbreakable bond they shared. The audience was silent, completely drawn into their story. Midway through the performance, the boy's voice cracked with emotion, but instead of faltering, the father placed his hand on his son's shoulder and sang even stronger. The crowd erupted in applause, touched by the realness of the moment. When the final note ended, there was a second of stunned silence before the entire auditorium stood in unison, clapping and cheering. Tears streamed down Heidi Klum's face as she said, "That was the most emotional performance I've ever seen." Sofia Vergara added, "You remind us of what family really means." Howie Mandel called them, "the heart of this competition." But it was Simon's reaction that truly stood out. He leaned forward, visibly moved, and said softly, "You two have something that money can't buy, pure love. And that's why people are connecting with you." The boy smiled shyly while the father bowed his head, grateful beyond words. That night, their song, "Hand in Hand," became a symbol of hope for millions who watched around the world. Fans began sharing the lyrics online, translating them into different languages. From small villages in the Philippines to big cities in America, people sang their song as a tribute to family and faith. Back in their hotel room, the father hugged his son tightly and whispered, "No matter what happens next, we already won, because we touched hearts." The boy nodded and said, "We'll keep singing, Papa." And as they looked out at the city lights of Los Angeles, they knew this was just the beginning of something far greater than fame. It was the legacy of love carried through music. As the finals drew closer, the father and son from Cebu began to feel the weight of what they had achieved. The world now knew their names, but they still carried themselves with the same humility that first captured everyone's hearts. In between rehearsals, they took long walks along the Los Angeles boardwalk, talking about their journey and the meaning of family. The father reminded his son that this competition was not about trophies or fame but about sharing love through music. One afternoon, while sitting in their dressing room, they received a surprise, a video message from their hometown in Cebu. The screen filled with familiar faces, neighbors, classmates, friends, and even the local mayor. Children from their village sang a small version of their song, "Hand in Hand," waving small flags and cheering, "Go, Papa and Kuya." The boy covered his mouth in disbelief, tears streaming down his cheeks, while his father wiped his eyes quietly. That message gave them new strength. They knew they were no longer just singing for themselves but for everyone who believed in them. For their final performance, they decided to sing the prayer, blending English and Cebuano lyrics to represent both their roots and their new dreams. It was a daring choice but one that felt true to their story. During rehearsals, their vocal coach and the AGT producers were amazed by how naturally they connected on stage. Their voices intertwined like they were born for that moment. On the night of the finals, the theater buzzed with energy. The lights dimmed, and the father-son duo stood side by side, holding hands. As the soft piano began, the boy's voice rose, fragile yet strong, singing with emotion beyond his years. The father followed, his tone deep and powerful, balancing his son's purity with warmth and grace. The moment they switched into Cebuano lyrics, the audience reacted with admiration. Even if most didn't understand the words, they could feel the sincerity. Simon Cowell leaned forward, his face serious but his eyes glistening. The performance built up to a breathtaking climax as both voices merged, rising with intensity until the final note filled the entire theater. There was silence, then an eruption of applause and cheers that seemed to last forever. Heidi Klum stood first, clapping above her head, followed by Sophia and Howie. Simon stood slowly, visibly emotional once again. He said, "This wasn't just a performance. This was a prayer. You reminded us why this show exists, to give real people a chance to touch hearts." The crowd roared in agreement. The father and son hugged tightly as golden lights bathed the stage once again, a symbol of how far they had come since that first nervous audition. That night, even before the results were announced, they already felt victorious. When the finale night arrived, tension filled the air. The father and son walked onto the stage one last time, greeted by cheers and waving flags from fans around the world. They chose to perform a medley that told the story of their journey, starting with a slow acoustic version of "You Raise Me Up," followed by a verse from their original song, "Hand in Hand," and ending with a reprise of "The Prayer." The father played his old guitar, the same one he had used back in Cebu, while his son sang with all his heart. Every lyric, every note carried years of sacrifice, love, and dreams fulfilled. The audience watched in complete silence, some wiping tears as the music built to its final moment. The boy's small hand reached out and held his father's, and together they sang the final line in perfect harmony. When the music stopped, the theater erupted in applause so loud it drowned out everything else. Simon Cowell stood again, clapping slowly, his eyes shining with tears. He said, "You didn't just perform tonight, you gave the world a piece of your soul." Heidi added, "You're not just father and son, you're magic." The boy smiled shyly, while his father looked up at the ceiling lights, visibly fighting back tears. When the results were announced later that night, they didn't take the first place trophy, but it didn't matter. The crowd's cheers were deafening, and people shouted their names as if they had already won. After the show, Simon personally met them backstage, congratulating them and saying, "You made us all proud. Never stop singing together." The following week, they returned to Cebu, where they were welcomed like heroes. The airport was filled with people holding banners, singing, and cheering. That night, they stood on a small stage in their hometown, singing under the same sky where their dreams had begun. As the father strummed his guitar and the boy's voice filled the night air, golden confetti, handmade by their neighbors, fluttered down around them, recreating that magical AGT moment. The father looked at his son and whispered, "We did it." The boy smiled and replied, "No, Papa, we're just beginning."